Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining our Live with Astronomer series. For those of you where it's your first one, these are shorter form things we do, tend to be about 15-ish minutes and really just focused on technical content and showing you how to do something. Before we go into the stuff we have planned for today, just wanted to kind of give a quick update on some community things that are happening over the next couple of weeks. So on exactly a week from today, wow, February kind of flew by. We're reigniting the Airflow meetup in San Francisco. This used to be a really buzzing meetup before the pandemic, and then it kind of died down. So now we're bringing it back. So if you have colleagues based in San Francisco, would love to see them. And then the very next day, we're doing a workshop in our office where Kenton is actually going to take people through how to get started with Airflow. So if you have colleagues in the area that are looking to get started or just want to see what's new, tell them to come to either or both events. As usual, we'd love for more folks to join the Apache Airflow Slack. And then for things outside of the general Airflow content stuff, or outside of the Apache Airflow umbrella of content, Tatiana from the Astronomer team is going to be doing a webinar on March 1st also about contributing to Apache Airflow with Women in Analytics. For those of you who haven't been to the Women in Analytics webinars, they are awesome. And they're doing like a 7-part series with us that we're very excited to participate in. So lots of good stuff going on. And last but not least, if you want to get your name up on this slide, please reach out to us. We'd love to blog with you on the Airflow medium, help you host a meetup or anything else of the sort. Alrighty, now that I have read the news, I'd like to introduce Kenton, who's our lead developer advocate, who's going to walk us through how to control some of your cloud bills by using the async Azure operators. So Kenton, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Raj. Thanks for going through the news. Lots of great stuff happening in the community. Now that we're done with the news portion, we get to move on to the finances portion of today's talk. So really excited for you all to join today. And kind of since we already built it in terms of finances, the topic of our live today is using Azure async operators. So hopefully all of you out there are using Azure in your workflows. That's going to be our focus today. For those not familiar, async operators and why we keep framing this in terms of saving money on your workflows. As of Airflow 2.2, I think I've kind of lost track, but newer versions of Airflow have support for asynchronous or deferrable operators, which are analogous to regular operators, but while they're waiting for work to happen, they will release their worker slot. So the biggest benefit of this is that you save resources. So all of those deferred tasks are managed within a single process within Airflow. It's called the trigger. It's much more efficient than having something just sitting there. So if you have any long-running tasks, it's going to both lessen the resources that you're using within your Airflow environment, which can save you money. Everybody loves that. It can also help you scale your Airflow instance. So because that worker slot is now available, it can be used for something else. So if you're operating at a high scale, that can be super helpful there. So we're going to talk about these deferrable or async operators. Those two terms are interchangeable today in the context of Azure. So working with your Azure workflows. I'm going to start by talking about Astronomer Providers, which we'll throw the link to this in the chat. But this is Astronomer's open source repo. This is a separate Python package from the core of Airflow that's going to contain a lot of these asynchronous providers, including the ones or operators, excuse me, including the ones that we're going to talk about today. So this is the package that you want to have installed in your Airflow instance. Again, it's open source, it's available to everybody, but it's not going to be part of core Airflow. So you do need to make this installation. And then in terms of using the Azure, so you're free to explore this. There's lots of asynchronous operators in here outside of the Azure ones that we won't talk about today, but definitely come in here and take a look at them when you have some time to see how else you can use these in your Airflow environment. But with that, I'm going to jump right into an example DAG so that we can see how this works in the context of Airflow. So this DAG that I'm going to show here, and I'm actually going to go ahead and kick it off right now because this one can take a few minutes to run. So we'll watch it go through its cycle here. But while it's doing that, I'll hop over to the graph view. What this DAG is doing is grabbing some data from the City Bikes API. So this is actually a mapped task. It has a couple of different instances of this task. So it's pulling different data sets from an API. It's then going to use Databricks, and actually this is the Azure Databricks that we're running this in, to run some transformations on this data. So we're assuming that this data is relatively large, and we want to leverage kind of the power of Spark to do that. So we're doing that in Databricks. We then move on to this run upstart pipeline, which you can see here is an Azure Data Factory run pipeline operator. So this is going to be helpful for those of you who already use Azure, who have like workflows already written using Azure Data Factory. You can orchestrate those from Airflow really easily, which makes it super straightforward to combine tasks like this where you're doing things in other systems like Databricks. So we're going to do this upsert of all of this data into our Azure database using this Azure Data Factory pipeline. And then the rest of these tasks, these are a couple of task groups based on the different data sets. These are all running some data quality checks. So again, these are mostly to highlight the benefit of using Azure Data Factory together with Airflow, as you can make use of these other Airflow operators there and easily implement that into your pipeline. So if you look at the operator names here, you'll notice that these first two, this one, the color is a little hard to see, but the Azure Data Factory run pipeline, you'll see it has async at the end. So does this Databricks submit run operator async. So these are both asynchronous operators. So again, those are going to release their worker slot while they're running. These are the two that potentially might take a longer time. So if you're doing a lot of processing in Databricks, that can take a while. If you are, running an Azure Data Factory pipeline that's upserting a lot of data into your database, that can take a while. Those are the types of tasks that are going to benefit from these asynchronous operators. That's not what I wanted to do. To move over to the code view here to show you how you actually implement these within your code. And one of the great things about asynchronous operators is that they always function analogous to the non-asynchronous version of that operator. So if you already have a DAG written, it's actually really easy to implement these. All you really have to do is change the import path. All of the parameters within the operator will be the same. So when we look at this DAG up front here, notice in our imports, we have, we're using this Astronomer Providers package. Again, this is the Microsoft one where we do import the Azure Data Factory run pipeline operator that's async. We then have this one from the Databricks folder. Again, in this particular case, our Databricks is running on Azure Databricks, but that works just with the regular Databricks submit run operator. So those are both asynchronous, so we import them there. And then we scroll down to where we define these operators. They look exactly the same as if you're familiar with the Azure Data Factory run pipeline operator or the Databricks submit run operator. You can see that you'll notice that they aren't really any different. For both of these, again, if you're already using them in a DAG, all you have to do is replace the name here with the async version. In fact, sometimes what we'll see folks do if you're working with an existing DAG is instead of actually replacing it here, you can even just import as the original name of the operator up top. So switch over to that Astronomer Providers import path, and then you don't actually have to change anything in your DAG. If you're writing a new DAG, that's great. You can just import as is and use the async version here. But that's all you have to do. There aren't any additional parameters. Again, Airflow is going to manage all of that running for you. And if we hop back over to grid view here, this is great. We're now on the Databricks transform task, and you can see that the color of this task status right now is purple. That's this deferred status. So what that means is that this task is running. It's now no longer holding its worker slot. So this particular one in past runs takes 3 to 5-ish minutes usually. So it'll sit here in purple until it's complete, at which case it will move on to the next task. Again, while it's sitting here in this state, you don't actually have to do anything, but your worker slot is no longer being used. That is either available to other tasks. Do you have other DAGs running in your environment? or it's just not going to be using those resources. So if you have tasks like this that are going to sit for a while, can be really, really beneficial in terms of those resource and cost savings. And let's see how long this has been going for, almost 2 minutes. So I might sit here for another couple of minutes, but then it will go through. This run upsert pipeline is going to do the same one. It's going to kick off the task, and then it's going to go into this deferred state until it's done. One thing I'll note is that, again, to make use of these Azure deferrable operators, you do have to have a trigger running. That's the process within Airflow that manages deferrable tasks. If you're using Astronomer runtime, as we are here, the trigger automatically runs for you. So if you use the Astro CLI locally, you'll notice a pod spun up for the trigger. You don't actually have to do anything. If you are working just with open source Airflow, there's a command that you can run to start the trigger, and there's great documentation on that. We have some on our Learn site at Astronomer, and the open source Airflow docs cover it as well. So super easy to get started there, and then again, you can make use of those great new operators that are particularly helpful for those long-running tasks. Cool. And while we sit and look at this in its purple state for a few more minutes, happy to take any questions.
It's always both great and horrible to do demos on live data because you don't know how long something's going to take. I think
a little bit of variation for how many minutes. So I can come up with some jokes.
Yeah, right. I think one question that came up is, could you just go over the migration process from a synchronous to an asynchronous operator one more time?
Yeah, for sure. So if you already have a DAG running and you want to change over to the async version, let's just use this Azure Data Factory run pipeline operator as an example. What you're going to want to do is first make sure that the Astronomer Providers package is installed in your Airflow environment. So if you're using the Astro CLI, you can add it to your requirements.txt file or any other way that you're installing packages, but make sure that that's installed. You'll then swap your import path from the old one to the new one. So you're going to put this in, take out your import from Azure Providers, whatever that path is. And then you either have two options for, you can either import this and replace the name of the operators down in your code like we do here to this async version. All of them, I think, add the word async to the end. So that should be pretty straightforward. Or alternatively, if you don't want to touch this code, you could do an import this operator as the operator name without the async version. So I've seen that done too. And we have some examples of that in our docs, but that's it. That's all you have to do. And then you'll be taking advantage of that.
Awesome. So can you just talk briefly about how async operators compare to sensors? I'm typing up an answer to this, but I think it'd be good if you said it as well.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I wanted to go back to the grid view. Oh, I missed the transition. So we've finished this pipeline now. So we've gone back from the deferred state. Yeah, that's a great question. So sensors are kind of different in functionality in that they are going to wait for some external criteria to happen before the task is completed. Whereas a deferrable operator is just any type of operator that might be long running that you want to release that slot while it's taking its time doing whatever. So there are actually async versions of sensors that exist, and those can be helpful again because then the sensor is not just sitting there taking its worker slot. There are a handful of cases where being able to use a deferrable operator has sort of lessened the need for sensors in certain cases, just because of how they work. I think the 5-tran provider is an example of that. Those are less common in general. I would describe them as kind of two separate things that might be used in conjunction. Yeah, good question.
And then the last question, and this is definitely something I forgot to say when we started the video because I was too busy reading the rest of the news. Is the recording and code going to be available to folks after the live?
Yes, absolutely. We will send, anybody who is registered will get an email link to the recording.
Awesome. That is my bad for not saying that to start. I hope nobody dropped thought that they weren't going to get that. Alrighty. I think that's all the questions that we had. Thank you all so much for joining. Like we said, these are meant to be short and sweet, but if you have any questions or want to chat more, please feel free to reach out to us, and we're always happy to chat. And we will see you next week at our webinar, and also hopefully at one of our meetups or workshops.
Yeah.
Talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.